In the modern world, there exists a widespread misconception, deeply rooted in the consciousness of many people, that there is a prescribed trajectory of life, adherence to which guarantees happiness and success. This is a story that society persistently transmits, forcing people to feel obliged to meet certain expectations and standards. And the saddest thing is that many unconditionally accept this story as truth without questioning it. We are instilled with the idea that youth is the zenith of human existence, that after 30 years begins an inexorable decline, and after 40 life practically ends. But what if all this is merely a carefully constructed lie? What if true life begins not in youth, when we strive to meet others' expectations, but at the moment when we realize that everything we have created up to that point is merely a reflection of imposed notions? As Carl Jung asserted, this turning point often occurs after the age of 40. It sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? For it contradicts everything we have been taught since childhood. No one tells us that the first 40 years of life are merely preparation, a period of accumulating experience, trials and errors, successes and failures, which do not always reflect our true desires and aspirations. For 4 decades, we are taught to be someone programmed for adaptation and conformity to accepted norms. But then comes the 40-year milestone, and something inside us begins to change. A sense of a crack emerges, a barely noticeable flaw in the facade we have so diligently built. And here begins the most interesting part. What will happen next? Will we be able to break free from imposed frameworks and start living authentically? The answer to this question, each must find for themselves. Sometimes it happens that familiar guidelines lose their relevance, and what once seemed important ceases to bring satisfaction. Motivation fades, and desired rewards seem meaningless. Questions begin to swirl in the mind about the authenticity of what is happening, about the true essence of the self when no one is watching, and about the degree of personal involvement in one's own actions. It is precisely at this moment that a turning point arrives, one that is not commonly spoken about aloud. This is an awakening, marking the beginning of the process of individuation as defined by Carl Jung. In the early years of life, a person constructs their identity based on external expectations. They play the roles of child, student, professional, parent, spouse, but rarely are they truly themselves. They adapt, wear masks, adjust to imposed forms. However, upon reaching the midpoint of life's journey, when the burden of these masks becomes unbearable, an awakening begins. This process can be painful, as all previous convictions collapse. Success, recognition, and approval lose their significance, and what a person sought to find no longer brings satisfaction. In the depths of life's reflections, 2 paths open before a person: to cling to the familiar, continuing to play a learned role and drag the following decades under a mask, or to decisively reject the past and start anew with a clean slate. The harsh truth, which few are ready to accept, is this: if, upon crossing the 40-year milestone, an individual is not tormented by doubts and does not feel that everything they have created might be an illusion, then they remain in a state of spiritual slumber, and unfortunately, the majority of people prefer to stay in this state. They deliberately close their eyes to the truth, preferring to hold on to what is familiar and comfortable, even if it is false. The comfort of routine seems more attractive to them than the dizziness of authenticity. However, those brave souls who dare to face the truth discover something incredible: freedom. When an individual stops worrying about what others expect of them, they begin to live by their own rules. When they realize that they are not obliged to follow a once-chosen path, they gain the opportunity to choose a different direction. And when they finally understand that true success lies not in the world's recognition but in what fulfills their soul, they begin to truly exist. Here arises a question capable of causing inner discomfort. To what extent is a person's current life truly their own? What part of daily actions reflects the true self, and what is merely an echo of others' expectations? Is there authentic living of life, or only the performance of an imposed role? It is easy to avoid such questions, continuing to move forward without deep self-analysis. However, sooner or later the truth will manifest. The burden of falsehood will become unbearable. When the moment of realization comes that the chosen path is someone else's, what then is to be done? It is important to understand that the 40-year milestone is not the beginning of decline, but a starting point for radical change. It is not an end, but the beginning of a new chapter. The time has come to break the shackles, to abandon the prescribed script, to free oneself from others' expectations, and to start creating one's own story. The main question, will there be enough courage? Jung called this process individuation, implying the becoming of the self, the attainment of one's own identity. In other words, this can be called a rebirth, and each person decides for themselves how to dispose of the opportunity that has opened up. It is precisely here that the decisive difference manifests between those who escape the captivity of illusions and those who continue to remain in its grip. Mere awareness that a person has lived behind someone else's mask is not enough. It is not enough to come to the understanding that they are merely an actor performing a role in a script written by others. The key question lies in what actions are taken when this realization comes. It is at this moment that the most difficult trial begins. When a person starts to rid themselves of everything superficial, of all that they are not in reality. When they tear off the masks of expectations, the pursuit of approval, the chase for ostentatious success, the first sensation is not liberation, but an oppressive, frightening emptiness. For throughout their life, a person's identity was defined by what they do, what they achieve, what impression they make on others. And what happens when all this is cast aside? A person faces the most terrifying question imaginable. Who am I when no one is watching? This is why many prefer to avoid working on themselves. They cling to the old, familiar identity, even if it is false. The fear of emptiness is quite real. It penetrates to the very depths of the soul and paralyzes the will. However, Carl Jung, more than anyone else, understood that emptiness is not a dead end, but a starting point. At the moment when an individual casts aside everything superficial, everything that is not their true essence, and finds themselves alone with the primordial silence of their being, a unique opportunity for transformation opens before them. This is a chance to build a new identity, the foundation of which will not be the expectations of others, but the true nature of the person. It is precisely here that the complex and meticulous work of self-knowledge begins. The search for one's true essence is not a short-term event, but a prolonged journey full of explorations, experiments, and discoveries. It is important to realize that this process is deeply individual. No one can walk this path for another, provide ready-made instructions, or point to the only correct way. The true self cannot be found in books, advice, or fashionable trends. It manifests in experience, in actions, in the courage to try new things, to take risks, to make mistakes, and to start anew. However, it must be acknowledged that not everyone is capable of reaching this point. Many prefer to remain in their comfort zone, clinging to what is familiar and safe, even if that safety is illusory. They refuse the opportunity to know their true self, preferring to live in accordance with others' perceptions and expectations. A radical break with the past and the start of a new life is a trial full of anxieties and doubts. It is no less difficult to look within oneself, setting aside all distractions, for this can be extremely unpleasant. Yet if a person gathers the courage and plunges into this inner emptiness, leaving behind all that is superficial and alien, they will be able to fearlessly explore the potential paths of their development. At this moment, the truth that Carl Jung sought to convey to everyone will be revealed. Life is not blind conformity to someone's expectations, but the overcoming of these frameworks and stepping beyond their limits. Only by freeing oneself from all that is not the true self does a person gain the opportunity to become who they are destined to be. It is precisely here that the most interesting and captivating adventure begins. When the process of shedding everything superfluous starts, when a person finally confronts that very inner emptiness face to face, something truly amazing happens. The world, which once seemed so familiar and comprehensible, appears in an entirely different light. Conversations that previously seemed important and meaningful now seem empty and senseless. Goals that motivated every morning now seem absurd and contrived. Fears that once shackled movement and paralyzed the will lose their power and influence. It is as if a veil suddenly lifts from the eyes and a true picture of the world emerges, far removed from ideals. This is a merciless reality, permeated with falsity and inhabited by people unaware of their captivity in a meaningless cycle. And here arises a difficulty that no one warns about. Awakening brings with it a sense of isolation. To the enlightened, aspects of existence become visible that are inaccessible to the majority. They perceive hidden mechanisms that previously went unnoticed. The realization that life paths diverge from those around them becomes the most severe test. Connections based on superficial interests lose their strength. Relationships sustained only by the necessity to play a certain role reveal their emptiness. Conversations that once filled leisure time turn into meaningless noise. It is precisely at this moment that many experience fear and retreat, for no one wishes to feel detached from society. No one wants to admit that years, and sometimes decades, might have been spent among people with whom no genuine closeness ever developed. However, liberation from the superficial self becomes one of the key moments in the process of self-knowledge. This stage entails the inevitable shedding of people who were attracted only to the false version of the personality. This process serves as a ruthless but necessary filter. Only by daring to let go of what does not align with the renewed self does an individual open the doors to attracting what is truly needed into their life. It is precisely here that the second stage of the journey to oneself begins, for individuation is not only the shedding of the old, but also a reconstruction. This aspect distinguishes those who awaken from those who get lost in confusion. Confronted with such a revelation, some people may fall into despair, clinging to nostalgic memories and wondering if perhaps it was better for them in the past, when they could still fit into a world that now seems alien. However, others realize a far more important truth. Now they have the opportunity to consciously choose the life they want to build. It is worth reflecting on the fact that until this moment, most aspects of life were the result of decisions made under the influence of external expectations and imposed norms. In every person's life comes a moment when they realize that their previous decisions, choosing a profession, a life partner, a style of behavior, were dictated by societal norms and expectations. A person followed prescriptions, considering them the correct path to success and recognition. But now a new perspective opens before them, the possibility of independently determining their destiny. And here arises a serious obstacle: the fear of making a mistake. Indeed, when an individual walks a well-trodden road, they always have an excuse. They were simply doing what was required of them. But when they take the courage to build their life independently, in case of failure, there will be no one to blame but themselves. This is why many, even having realized the truth, do not dare to take their life into their own hands. They prefer to remain in a kind of gray zone where they are no longer in complete ignorance, but also do not dare to move forward. However, as the renowned psychologist Carl Jung asserted, the process of individuation is a path full of discomfort and trials. It involves confronting deep-seated fears, re-evaluating established beliefs, and dismantling the old to build something new and authentic. It is about transformation, a metaphorical death of the old self and subsequent rebirth, a process inevitably accompanied by a period of trials and uncertainty. Yet behind this strip of darkness lies an experience accessible to only a few, a sense of boundless freedom, when an individual liberates themselves from the shackles of others' expectations and begins to build an existence in harmony with their inner aspirations. An astonishing change occurs. Agonizing anxiety gradually fades. The relentless pursuit of an elusive goal that constantly slips away dissipates like smoke. Dependence on external approval loses its significance. The obsessive desire to conform to accepted norms and standards disappears. Instead, something far more valuable emerges: inner harmony. This state of peace does not depend on external factors, be it achievement, recognition, or praise. It grows from the realization that a person lives in accordance with their deepest convictions and principles. In this lies the fundamental difference between passive existence and full living, between reacting to external circumstances and making a conscious choice, between playing the role of a copy created under the influence of others' perceptions and unveiling one's true, authentic self. However, there is one important aspect that is often overlooked. The process of self-knowledge and personal growth has no end. There is no moment when one can confidently say, "I have found myself, I am completely free." Individuation is not a final goal, but rather a continuous journey. Each new stage of life presents a person with new challenges requiring re-evaluation, the rejection of outdated self-concepts, and the discovery of new facets of their personality. The significant change lies in the fact that once awakened to consciousness, a person can no longer return to their former state of ignorance. This awareness radically alters their perception of the world. When the understanding comes that true life begins with accepting one's true essence, a person begins to see everything from a different angle. Decisions are made consciously, not out of fear. Only those people remain in their surroundings who genuinely share their values and views, not those who were there only because the person met their expectations. Life fills with meaning and purpose, instead of being a passive reaction to external circumstances. This is precisely the key difference between those who awaken to a conscious life and those who remain captive to illusions. Ultimately, the key question facing every person is not how to manage their life, but what kind of person they aspire to become. As soon as an individual finds the courage to honestly answer this question, all other aspects of their existence fall into harmony and meaning. It is at this moment that a turning point arrives when a person realizes that there is no way back. They can no longer ignore the inner voice that calls them to change, cannot deny the excitement that grips them at the thought of a new life. This is the paradox of truth. Once it is seen, it cannot be turned away from. One can try to suppress it, distract themselves with daily concerns, sink into routine, but deep down, something has already cracked. This crack will grow relentlessly until the person decides to step over it. For there is nothing more tragic than living a life in ignorance. But even worse is to realize the truth and take no action. However, it is important to remember that to begin this journey, one does not need to have all the answers or ready-made solutions. It is enough to take the first step, however small and uncertain. This step will become the starting point on the path to self-knowledge and the attainment of the true self. The sensation of fear, inner uncertainty, creeping doubts about the correctness of the chosen path, all these are inevitable companions of any endeavor. Moreover, the absence of these anxious forebodings may indicate that a person is standing still, not developing. Personal growth is always accompanied by discomfort. Stepping out of the comfort zone is painful. This is why only a few achieve what they desire. The majority prefer to remain in a state of so-called analysis paralysis, endlessly weighing all the pros and cons in a futile search for confidence in their abilities. However, confidence is not something that precedes action, but something that comes with experience in the process of moving toward a goal. The main task is to stop futile waiting, to cease searching for some mythical sign from above, to dispel doubts, and to start acting. One should not hope for a miracle, for someone to come and point out the right path, to relieve one's torments. The perfect moment will never arrive. There is only the moment when a person decides to act, and that moment is now. At the same time, one should not expect the world to greet the awakening with enthusiasm, showering praise and congratulations for the courage to go against the current. When a person begins to live in accordance with their inner truth, they inevitably become a threat to those who do not dare to do the same. Inevitably, there will be moments when stressful criticism and doubts are directed at them, when they will be tempted to stray from their chosen path and made to doubt its validity. And the roots of such behavior lie not in the person themselves, but in the fact that their transformation serves as a painful reminder of others' passivity and inaction. Seeing them confidently moving forward, others involuntarily realize their own stagnation, their inability to break free from a closed circle. It is precisely at such moments that one must show firmness of spirit and remember that the chosen path is intended not to satisfy others' expectations, but for personal growth and self-realization. One should not seek approval, wait for confirmation of the correctness of their actions, or ask permission for change, for only the person themselves has the right to define their essence and decide who they will be. Now, each person faces a choice. They can simply close this page and return to their usual way of life as if nothing happened, or allow what has been heard to become a starting point for change. They can continue to drift with the current, doing what has always been done, or decisively change course and start moving in an entirely new direction. And if the second option is chosen, if a person decides to take the first step toward their true life, it is important to remember one thing. It is never too late. It does not matter how much time was spent in darkness, how many years were lived with an identity that did not reflect the true essence. The main thing is to take a step forward, and then new horizons will open. The main question that should now concern everyone is how to dispose of one's life starting from this moment. For the life path is not a pre-laid road with an inevitable end. The future is shaped solely by personal choice and actions. Therefore, it is worth asking oneself, is there readiness to begin living a full life, consciously and actively? If these words have found a resonance, the author urges leaving a comment with the phrase, "Awakening is irreversible." This will be a sign that a person has not only heard but understood the essence of the message, is ready for change, and prepared to take the first steps on a new path. And if all that has been said earlier has touched the deepest structures of the soul, the author suggests subscribing to the channel, emphasizing that this is merely a starting point. Ahead, await many discoveries and new horizons. Until we meet again in the next video.